The iPhone 13 Pro and iPhone 12 Pro Max both have great cameras, but now it's time to compare them and see which one you like the most. I know most people don't upgrade their phone every year, but it's still fun to see how much of a difference there is, or how little of a difference there is between the two phones. And like all my camera comparisons, pretty much everything you see in this video has been shot on one of these two phones without any edits. And if you're wondering why I'm using the 13 Pro instead of the 13 Pro Max, well, they have exactly the same cameras, and I wanted to save a bit of money. Like all comparisons, personal preference plays a big part in all this, plus the screen you're viewing on does make a difference. Both phones are running iOS 15, so let's see the photos. In good light, it's going to be hard to tell the difference between the two. Results from the wide camera are really similar on most shots. The image processing on the 13 Pro looks to give its photos a little more contrast, and on some shots, photos have slightly more dynamic range, but it's really not a dramatic change from one phone to the other. That said, I do think lens flare is better controlled on the wide camera on the 13 Pro than it is on the 12. I tried to exaggerate the effect by shooting straight into the sun so you could see the halo effect in the bottom right-hand corner. It's more pronounced on the 12 Pro Max. Now's also a good time to mention photographic styles on all the iPhone 13 models. Essentially, it's applying a preset to your images before you take them, and you can see the effect live on screen. It's not a filter because it's identifying and applying local edits, like it would know that grass should have the effect applied, but if it spots a face, it would make sure that skin tones stay accurate. And you can also customize the existing presets, so if you wanted to bring out more warmth, for example, you can. Or if you wanted to take out a bit of that contrast on the default settings to make shots look more like those from the 12, you can do that too. Next, let's take the phones to one of the highest points in San Francisco to check out the telephoto cameras. The 12 Pro Max has a 2.5 times optical zoom at f2.2, while the 13 Pro and Pro Max go to 3 times at f2.8. It's not going to get you that much closer, especially for really far away subjects, but a little bit extra is nice. If you need to get even closer, both the phones have digital zoom. Here's the 10 times comparison, which is okay if you have enough light. The 13 Pro definitely processes the image a bit better here. It's got some more detail retained, and you can even go all the way up to 15 times on the newer phone, while the 12 Pro Max is capped at 12 times digital zoom. Let's be real, neither look great at this most extreme length, so don't say I didn't warn you. Switching to the ultra-wide, it looks like the 13 again has a bit more contrast than the 12 on some shots, and overall, images are definitely sharper. But the biggest change is the newer phone has autofocus on the ultra-wide. Now that means macro photography. The results can actually be really impressive if you have enough light on your subject, and of course if it stays relatively still. You can get as close as 2 centimeters from your subject, and it will automatically switch from the wide camera to the ultra-wide once you move in. The 12 Pro Max doesn't have AF on the ultra-wide, so macro is really out of the question here. And its minimum focusing distance on the wide camera means you can only get about this close before things start to get out of focus. For selfies, the newer phone has a bit more contrast and vibrancy, again thanks to that new image processing pipeline. The front-facing camera specs are actually the same on each phone, so I'm not going to talk too much about selfies. Again though, you could use a custom photographic style if you wanted to tweak the look but still maintain skin tone accuracy. Now let's get into low-light images right after sunset during blue hour. Noise reduction is a bit better on the 13 Pro on all of the cameras, so images do look a touch cleaner when you zoom in. As a result though, sometimes it looks a little too clean, and on certain shots I found that I lost a little bit of detail compared to the 12. But really, I'm trying to nitpick here to find the differences, and I'm really having a tough time separating them for the most part. For me, the most interesting difference is when you use night mode. Rather than boosting the brightness throughout the scene, almost like you can see in the dark, the 13 Pro leaves more nuance in the shadows, so it's a little bit darker and more moody overall. Now you might like it, you might not, but it's a different look from the older phone. Now that's in part because the 12 Pro Max generally chooses a slightly longer exposure time for night mode. While that makes sense given some of the shots look brighter, it also means that they could be susceptible to camera shake. When you move to the ultra-wide camera, you can see an even bigger difference thanks to the 13 Pro's faster maximum aperture at f1.8 compared to f2.4 on the 12 Pro Max.
More light is captured, so there's better detail and less mush on the 13 Pro, especially when you zoom in to look at the detail. Let's talk video. Both of them can shoot in 4K at up to 60 frames a second, and the video looks really similar on both in good light. I also found the optical image stabilization was pretty similar with the walking shot, with a slight edge to the 13 Pro, although again it really does feel like I'm splitting hairs a bit. That said, the 13 Pro is definitely better at controlling flare, like you can see in this clip shot on the ultrawide, and I definitely do like a little bit of that added contrast boost. It just makes the image pop. Alright, let's get into cinematic mode on the 13 Pro. It detects when a face or a subject enters the frame and shifts the focus accordingly, kind of like a personal focus puller in your pocket. You can leave it up to the phone to adjust focus, which I think works fine for more simple scenes, but of course, being me, I like to make things more complicated with this scene of flowers in the foreground and me in the background. The phone locks onto me automatically as soon as I enter, but when I leave, it doesn't really know where to go. I can actually adjust this after filming by looking at the keyframes and then tapping on the thing I want to switch focus to, say like this flower. Now, when I leave the frame, it smoothly switches focus to the flower in the foreground. I also like how you can adjust the virtual f-stop just like you can in portrait mode photos. And most importantly, I am happy to report that cinematic mode works on pets as well. Here's a side-by-side with the 12 Pro Max so you can see a comparison with and without cinematic mode applied. The good news is you can use cinematic mode on the wide, the telephoto, and the front camera. The bad news is, unfortunately, you're currently capped at 1080p at 30 frames a second. So there you have it. The iPhone 13 Pro has some obvious software advantages like cinematic mode and hardware features like autofocus on the ultrawide for macro photos. You'll notice I didn't talk about ProRAW on the iPhones because that's a whole other video in itself. If you are interested in that, let me know. Plus, ProRes video on the 13 Pro isn't available yet and should be coming later in the year. But overall, most of the images are really, really close. So unless you want those extra features that I mentioned, I wouldn't necessarily consider upgrading from the 12 Pro Max because it's still such a good phone camera.
Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you let me know which phone you like the most down in the comments below. And if you want to find out more information about the phones, the cameras, and lots of extra detail on how you can get your hands on them, I've put some links in the description below. I'll catch you next time.